Hello, Nutrition 160 students, and welcome to Chapter 14, Fitness. You will find that this is a pretty brief chapter. It's 9 slides. Now, I want to start with this. Some of us wonder what are some guidelines for physical activity or physical fitness. And according to the American College of Sports Medicine, or ACSM, there's three main categories of fitness, and all three of these categories, or I should say components, should be incorporated into one's physical activity, or I should say exercise regimen. Okay, so your exercise regimen or your physical fitness plan should include cardiorespiratory movements, strength movements, and flexibility, or I should say programs, sorry, cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory program, a strength training program, and a flexibility program. And these programs or components can also be combined in one exercise session or be broken down throughout the week. But type of activity that encompasses cardiorespiratory components are aerobic based, and they're basically, like it says here, aerobic activity that uses large muscle groups and can be maintained continuously for a longer period of time. Frequency should be 5 to 7 days per week, and the intensity is pretty moderate. Okay, so in physical fitness, we use something called rate of perceived exertion scales, or RPE scales, and they can be from 1 to 10 or 1 to 20. And based on that scale, you rate yourself as 1 being the lowest intensity and 10 or 20 being the highest, how you're feeling when you're performing that activity. So moderate, if it's a scale of 1 to 10, is more like in the 5 to 6 range. Okay. Strength training, you should include some kind of resistant activity that is performed at a controlled speed and through a full range of motion. 2 to 3 days per week, and they can be combined with some cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory activities. And it's enough to enhance muscle strength and improve your body composition. Again, muscle is more active than fat, so having a strength program can help increase your muscle mass, or what we call it in kinesiology, your fat-free mass. Flexibility, which is something that I have to work on. I'm more of a big strength and cardiorespiratory person, but flexibility includes stretching activities that uses your major muscle groups 2 to 7 days per week, alone or combined with the other components, and enough to feel a tightness or slight discomfort. And you're going to find you can go further each time because you're improving. Okay, so these are the components that should encompass your exercise regimen. And as you see here, duration is part of a guideline as well. So when you are doing cardiorespiratory activities, there should be at least 30 minutes per day. They could be longer. Strength training should be 2 to 4 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions. It can be as high as 20, I found as well, depending on how you're feeling and what your goal is. And they involve major muscle groups like the chest, the back, and the gluteus muscles. 2 to 4 repetitions if you're doing flexibility, 15 to 30 seconds per muscle group. So when you're holding the stretch, it would be you hold it for 15 to 30 seconds, and then you rest and do it and repeat that 2 to 4 times. That's considered a repetition when you perform something one time. And examples of cardiorespiratory, as you see here, are soccer, racquetball, tennis, volleyball, running, power walking, cross-country skiing. So these are activities that usually tend to improve the functioning of your cardiorespiratory system, such as your heart and arteries. Strength training includes pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, Pilates, weightlifting, and then flexibility includes a yoga program. If a lot of you are if any of you in here, if your major is kinesiology, which is the study of the art and movement of the human body, my undergraduate degree is actually in kinesiology with the emphasis in exercise physiology. So for those of you that are majoring in that same category or branch of kinesiology, I can be a reference. But what I want you to know is when I studied my undergraduate degree, we used the American College of Sports Medicine to also guidelines to also, we used them in our laboratory when we ran exercise physiology tests on patients, okay, and participants and ourselves as well. So if you are majoring in kinesiology, you usually will use the ACSM guidelines for your colleges, for your labs, or also the National Strength and Conditioning Association NSCA guidelines, either one or both. Now match these. It's regarding cardiorespiratory endurance. You can pause the lecture right now and then come back to it to see if you got them correct. So here are the answers. Cardiorespiratory endurance is B and D. So cardiorespiratory endurance supports ongoing activity of heart, lungs, and blood. So supports and also increases the fitness and functioning of your respiratory system and your cardiovascular system. And also D, aerobic training enhances capacity for the delivery of oxygen and removal of waste in the body. Now B, body composition, the answer C. Lean muscle mass increases and reduces excess fat. C is muscle endurance. It goes with E. Work harder and longer without fatigue. And it includes your daily tasks as well. And then flexibility, D goes with A. It allows joints to move through range of motion, bend, and recover. Here's the explanation. The measure of cardiorespiratory endurance is maximal oxygen uptake, also known as VO2 max. A body and mind benefit from receiving oxygen more readily. Cardiorespiratory conditioning. Aerobic workouts improve your heart and lung function, again, your respiratory and cardiovascular systems. Also enhance oxygen delivery. We call that cardiac output. And as someone gets more fit, we say in the kinesiology field, the cardiac output improves. You can also at rest, and also when you work out, it means that you have a slower heart rate. Your heart is working less because it's more efficient. You have more efficient breathing, improved circulation, and then lower blood pressure. Some of you have heard that some extreme athletes, when they're at rest, their heart rate at rest is very low, and that's because they're physically fit. Okay. Now you don't want it to be too low, like in the 30s, because that can also not be good. You're not getting enough blood flow. Resistant training. So resistant training, the purpose is to build muscle mass and develop and maintain muscle strength, muscle power, and muscle endurance. So your muscle performs, right? But it can perform different types of movements. It can perform movements that are endurance-based, like prolonged. It can perform powerful movements, which are more like regarding strength and power of the muscle. So also some of the other benefits is for prevention of chronic diseases. Um, Having stronger muscles also enhances the functioning of other surrounding tissue like cartilage and ligaments and tendons, and we have an overall better, stronger, more healthier body. It maximizes and maintains bone mass, improves posture, and reduces risk of back injury. Also, like I mentioned before, strength versus power versus endurance. So when you do strength training, you can do, depending on what you're doing, it can increase the strength of your muscle, the amount of power that your muscle can elicit or put out, and also the endurance of your muscle. Okay. So like if you're very good at jogging for an hour and you get better over time, your muscles have improved in endurance. If you, for instance, are able to do like bicep curls, um, and you're able to do the same weight over a period of time, it's much easier for you. You have to move up a weight and you're increasing the strength of your muscles. And also power, for example, if you're ever to perform certain movements that put your muscles in high intensity movements, for instance, like doing a jump squat or jump roping, and doing more reps and sets of those, and those become easier, those can increase the power of your fiber muscles as well. The Balanced Fitness Program, again, has a strength component, cardiovascular, respiratory component, and a flexibility component, and it's pretty balanced. And the level of intensity should vary. So it's good to change your exercise program so that sometimes you're performing movements that are not just moderate intensity, but also high intensity and maybe a little bit more on the lower side. Okay, those all give you benefits. It addresses all aspects of fitness, which are the aspects of fitness are not just cardiovascular based, or cardiorespiratory based, strength based, and flexibility, but aspects of fitness also include duration, frequency, intensity, and volume. So intensity is how hard you're working out. That should be taken into account. How long you're working out, how frequent, the frequency you're doing that, and also how long, I think I mentioned that. And then volume is what is the amount of work that you're putting in a week. For example, if you run, your volume could be 50 miles or 10 miles, depending on what the volume is that you're running, the amount of running you're doing. Glycogen stored in the body. So we learned in the carbohydrate chapter that you can store carbohydrates in your muscles and in your liver, and we store most of the glycogen, the stored form of carbohydrate, in the muscles. So we can store about 2,000 calories worth of glycogen, or 500 grams. Some athletes can store more than others, especially those that are endurance athletes, more aerobically trained. That's enough for about 20 miles of running. When glycogen is depleted, your muscles will fatigue, and we call that hitting the wall. And the amount of stored glycogen depends on your diet as well. So studies have verified that a higher carbohydrate diet will increase your glycogen stores. And some of the research, even though there's all these types of different diets that are testing what is better for an athlete before they hit fatigue, we're still finding that high carbohydrate diets are still much better than other diets, for instance, that are higher in fat and lower in carbs. And that athletes that are endurance based that have higher carbohydrate diets prior to competition, or in general a higher carbohydrate diet, it takes them longer before the fatigue compared to those that have lower carbohydrate diets. High intensity activities also use more glycogen. A lot of us do not know this. We think that we use a lot of this glycogen or carbs that is stored in our body only like in marathon events, triathlons, or long cycling events, those longer events. But if you do high intensity activities, especially like between 1 or 2 minutes long and high intensity, you're using mainly carbohydrates or glycogen to fuel your activity. For instance, like if you wrestle for a minute or two on the mat, if you jump rope for a minute, you're using mainly carbohydrates. And a lot of us do this type of a exercise activity called HIIT, where it's like you work hard for a minute or two and then you rest and you perform a movement or several movements in a circuit type of way with hard intensity and rest. That uses a lot of glycogen or carbs as well. A lot of us, a lot of times we hear trainers saying you're burning a lot of fat doing this kind of a high intensity activities, but in reality, you're using more carbohydrates. You'll start to use the fat as that activity gets longer and longer in minutes. So some of us also use a combination of different macronutrients to fuel our activities. The product of anaerobic glycolysis. So before we go on further, is we talked a lot about cardiorespiratory activities, aerobic based. If you want to revisit the energy metabolism chapter, chapter 7, it goes well with this chapter. You will understand the concepts better. But you guys learned that aerobic means with oxygen. So aerobic activities mean they're activities that utilize oxygen. Now, anaerobic activities are the ones that can be performed without oxygen, and those are usually shorter in duration and higher in intensity. We call it anaerobic glycolysis. That's the system or pathway we're using to fuel these higher intensity, shorter in duration activities. If you ever had of lactate or lactic acid, there is a difference. Lactate and lactic acid, the difference is the hydrogen. So lactic acid has more hydrogens, and your body tends to dumb down lactic acid into lactate so that it can get rid of some of the hydrogen, so it's not as acidic for your body. Okay. Now lactate is a product of anaerobic glycolysis. And anaerobic glycolysis is when you're utilizing glucose for energy for these high intensity, shorter duration activities. And as a result, that glucose gets converted to lactate, and the lactate can be used to fuel your activity. You usually use lactate for activities that are about, like it says here, when accumulation rates exceed of clearing, activity can only be sustained to 1 to 3 minutes. So it's usually activities that are very high intensity that last anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes. You're using lactate, and lactate comes from glucose again. Actually, you can revisit chapter 7 because I go through how it becomes lactate, but just to review, glucose gets converted to 2 pyruvates, and these 2 pyruvates get converted to lactate, eventually lactic acid, and then lactate. It gets rid of some of the hydrogens, and lactate can be used to fuel. Now, if you ever heard of a burn, the burn comes from the following. So there's an important coenzyme called NADH. You guys remember that from the energy metabolism chapter. This coenzyme NADH, when pyruvate is converted to lactate, pyruvate loses hydrogens, and these hydrogens end up in the bloodstream. Now, these hydrogens have to be cleared, and what happens is when you're performing this activity, too high intensity and too fast, and you're not giving your body enough time to recover, then these hydrogens build up in the blood and you get this burning sensation. So it's due to the hydrogen atoms that are released into your bloodstream as a result of pyruvate becoming lactate and these NADHs not being given enough time to pick up the hydrogens from your blood and clear it. Now, lactate and fatigue. Lactate quickly leaves the muscle. And again, you need NAD to do that. It will pick up some of the hydrogens. It travels in the blood to the liver, and the liver helps with the clearing of these hydrogens. And the liver enzymes convert it back into glucose, and this is considered the Cori cycle. Recommended protein intakes for athletes. So athletes generally need, depending on the category of athlete, anywhere from 1.0 all the way up to 2.0 according to your book, but also 2.2 grams for every kilogram they weigh. Now, to give you an example of how to do this calculation, if you weigh, let's say 100 pounds, if you're dealing with like maybe a small gymnast that weighs 100 pounds, to get kilograms, you divide pounds by 2.2. So you would if you did an 100-pound gymnast divided by 2.2 weighs 45.45 kilograms, so 45.5 kilograms. Now let's say that you decided that this gymnast needs 1 gram of protein for every kilogram they weigh. So you would take 45.5 times it by 1 gram of protein, and then the athlete will need 45.5 grams of protein just to meet their needs. So that's how you do the calculations. You convert pounds to kilograms, and then you times it by the amount of protein per gram per they need, and you get as a result. Okay, let's do another example. Like it says here on the note, daily protein intakes are based on a 70 kilogram pound man. So someone that is 154 pounds, if you divide that by 2.2, you get 70 kilograms. So let's say that I decided this man, based on the type of athlete they are, they need 2 grams of protein for every kilogram they weigh. So times 70 by 2, and he would need 140 grams of protein per day. How do you decide that? It depends on the type of athlete they are. It depends everything on frequency, volume, what they're doing in their exercise regimen. Most power athletes like bodybuilders and power lifters and Olympic weightlifters, they were more on the higher end, like 2.0. Whereas if you're someone that's just like exercising 3 days a week and looking to gain a little muscle, you might need more like 1.0 or 1.2. And a lot of recreational athletes like basketball players and soccer players, they're somewhere between 1.2 and 1.6 grams for every kilogram they weigh, okay? But according to your book, it says the RDA for adults, the recommended dietary allowance for adults that are not active, is 0.8 grams for every kilogram they weigh. Protein intake for grams a day per males, it's about 56 just in general for males, just to get their needs met, and 44 grams a day for females. Now, recommended intake for athletes, this is where you have to convert their weight to kilograms and then times it by the amount of protein they need per day. So it's saying here for athletes, the recommended intake is 1.2 to 2.0 according to your book, but I found that some athletes can go as high as 2.2 for every kilogram they weigh. Protein intakes grams a day per male, therefore, is about 84 to 140 grams a day of protein, depending on what type of athlete you are. And then protein intake for athletic females can range from 66 to 110 grams. Now, the U.S. average says here, these are non-athletes, just general people. General males consume about 99 grams of protein a day, and then 68 grams protein. So most of us, even though we're non-athletes, if you're a non-athlete in here, we're still consuming more than our recommended dietary allowance. A lot of us consume a lot. Someone asked me what is considered a high protein diet. A high protein diet is considered if you're consuming more than the double of what you need. For example, if you need 50 grams of protein a day, Or let's go back to that example that I give about right here below. A 70-kilogram man needs 140 grams a day. So if that male consumed more than 140 times 2, so 140 times 2 is 280. So if that male consumed more than 280 grams a day, it's considered an extremely high protein diet, and I would have to precaution him of many things. So a very high protein diet is usually if you're eating more than double what is recommended for you a day.